welcome to the webinar today. My name is Zachary Rainey. I am the Partnerships and Events Manager here at One Valley. Very excited to be joined and be hosting this webinar in tandem with Freshworks for Startups, especially being joined by Diksha here, as well as Brogan Taylor. Brogan is the head of enterprise sales for North America over here at Freshworks. Just to kind of before we get started, and for the uninitiated, for those who don't know what Passport is the world's most comprehensive digital innovation platform. We connect entrepreneurs and emerging startups with kind of all of the vital resources, perks, mentorships, and access to some potential revenue streams like investor networks and things like that. Can be facilitated through our network. To date, we have roughly 40,000 members on our network, over 175 mentors on it as well. And we are actually happy to boast that to date, we've had all the startups that have kind of been like leveraging the Passport platform have gotten investments upwards of $1 billion in totality. So that's pretty cool. Just to talk a little bit more about about Freshworks and who's going to be joining us today. Freshworks provides a lot of innovative customer engagement software like a CRM, marketing automation, help desks, chat bots, things like that. For all businesses of all sizes, it just makes it easier to acquire and close and keep customers, and basically keep an eye on your customer throughout the totality of that life cycle. Those of the One Valley Passport community actually have access up to about $10,000 worth of Freshworks credits, which is an insane amount. So if you are looking to kind of level up your CRM strategy and things like that, I would definitely recommend checking out our perks page just to kind of look at what's being offered there. And also we're joined by two people from Freshworks that'll be able to illuminate kind of that relationship a little bit later on today. So we are joined by Brogan Taylor, head of enterprise sales for North America. I would introduce him, but since we have the man himself here, I figured we can just go ahead and let him kind of introduce himself. So Brogan, thank you so much for joining, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, first of all, thanks for having us. What a great opportunity, and what a great group of people from seeing the backgrounds that are likely on this call. I wish I had the time to get to know each and every one of them. And please do feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's a wonderful thing that One Valley is doing, and that you all are doing as entrepreneurs, presumably a lot of you on this call. Just real quick, and maybe the relevance, maybe this will, we really kind of want to keep this fireside chat style, although I'm kind of tired of that term like everybody else. But we do want to keep it interactive and based around a few core themes. And mostly, I'll just quickly tell you my background so you can kind of understand where I've been, maybe at times in parts of your journey. So right out of school, I started at WebEx. I lived in the Bay Area for about 10 years. I started at WebEx back when it was an SMB company. And really, my career into the enterprise followed WebEx into the enterprise. So as WebEx grew into the enterprise, I went into the enterprise with them into various leadership roles. My computer's freaking out here a little bit. Bear with me 1 second. It's working really hard for very little. And now, as you know, WebEx is predominantly an up-market company. And then from there, I worked with several kind of Series A, B companies, and really the charter there in both of those right after WebEx was really to push into the enterprise, really working directly with the CEO, the C-suite, the product team, et cetera, and trying to organize the company and their structure and their product market fit to push into the enterprise. In one of those instances, if anybody's familiar with a company called Uvu, at the time, I think they had like 16 million video chat users. Back in the day, they were predominantly a B2C company, like a lot of college users, et cetera. And the charter there was to work with the board and essentially do a spin out to take it into B2B and what we called the enterprise. So it was really kind of the difference of moving from consumer into business to business. So that full prosumer model. There's been a couple similar I'd say journeys with friends and colleagues similar to that throughout. And yes, here we are today at Freshworks. And Freshworks is very similar in the sense that it very much started as a very proud SMB company, bringing what once was a predominantly enterprise type solution and making it available to all size companies, really for the first time in this market's history for this particular vertical within SaaS, and following their journey up into the enterprise and really joining them as they're starting to really push into that up market mass. So that's a bit of the background, but yeah, we'll maybe start from there and see what kind of questions we can get to spur some conversations.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. So yeah, just to kind of let the attendees know, today is a little less webinar, a little more AMA kind of sort of. We're kind of leveraging chat to help us come up with fantastic questions for Brogan. So if you have your small business, your startup, you have any questions about the enterprise practice, feel free to post them in the Q&A area or in the chat area. Just to get kind of a ballpark of where our attendees are, we do have a poll here that I would love to kind of to put out to the audience while we're facilitating some Q&A. So just to go ahead and launch that for everyone. We kind of wanted to figure out exactly kind of where your business is, what stage of growth you're at, how many customers you may have, and then as well as how many enterprise customers you might have. That'll definitely help us kind of figure out where we should be gearing this conversation, whether it's more towards the newer people or more towards getting and retaining those customers throughout the process. Ooh, a lot of votes coming in here for all of our questions. Oh, thank you so much for all the responses. Looks like we're across the board in terms of growth stage. For these, about 25% in each category, a little bit less in post, but that's to be expected, right? Customer bases are very heavily in the 0 to 5, so getting that first customer might be a topic of concern that we can focus on today. And yeah, enterprise customers, again, we're looking at 0 to 1 is definitely kind of something that we might want to focus on. So maybe, Brogan, we could start there. Getting those first few, like getting that first name in the door, kind of what's the process of getting them kind of through?
Yeah. If I could, I'm gonna build the clock to tell time, so to speak, for just a quick second, because I think it's really important based on the stages that that a lot of people said that they're at. This might sound like common sense to most people on the call, but then again, I've been at several companies where we had to live through these decision-making processes that were not necessarily obvious at the company's growth stage at the time. Kind of center to that is, are we ready to go into the enterprise, and how do we do it in a responsible way that will grow the business? So I'll just back up and say that a lot of growth stage companies or early stage growth companies, I have seen the company as a whole get over enthused with the prospect of bringing in enterprise accounts, and they bring in those enterprise accounts at the risk or many times at the consequence of, if you will, bring in the whale that sinks the ship, right? And I would just, for those that are in those early stages, I would say never get that excited about an enterprise account. Anytime that I'm looking at enterprise, I'm looking at enterprise, and I, as I'm working with founders in previous companies or with our product teams here, I've always been really, really clear. I will never bring a deal to you, if you will, that we want to bring on board if it's not for the greater good of our SaaS community and the growth and scalability of our SaaS platform. In other words, I never want to be a custom development shop for one company. Now, the enterprise companies can lead you to things that you know are kind of that will eventually have to be tackled, and that's okay. But then it's always our job to try to sequence that. Are we ready for level 10 when really we're not at level 3 yet? So I think to answer the question, like when I'm looking at the first enterprise customers that we want to bring on board or that we're having dialogues with, I'm working really closely with product and with the CEO, depending on how involved they are in the product and the founders, um, especially at growth stage companies, and really trying to sequence like, all right, if we look at, again, I'm just going to say it on a scale of 1 to 10, being advanced, 10 being advanced functionality. What are the things that we can knock off, like 1, 2, 3, 4, that will go help us capture much more market share in the process of doing that. So like landing this enterprise customer can help pay for this superset of, we'll call it advanced roadmap and positioning that we otherwise wouldn't have, if that makes sense. And it sounds obvious not to do this. I've seen way too many times where people get enthralled with just taking down the enterprise account that thrashes the ship in some cases to death.
Yeah, maybe that's a great place to start, is kind of highlighting the definitely everybody looks at it as kind of the whale that everybody wants to have. Those check sizes can get pretty significant, but right. Yeah, making sure that it doesn't drag you down with it.
Don't let it change your vision, right? Let it serve you versus work against you long term. Sorry to interrupt there, Zach, but yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's kind of, we're here for your expertise. But no, just kind of to move maybe into some Q&A while we kind of facilitate that next topic. Let's start out with Hakan, I guess. Just starting to build a B2B sales team. What role do you think should be kind of the first hire there? Should it be a senior account executive, or should it be something a little different? What does that look like?
A very versatile, resilient, smart person, almost like a GM type. That's what I've seen. Like as you're breaking into, they have to be the kind of person that's not just your traditional AE. They have to be somebody very entrepreneurial. They have to be somebody in growth stage companies that is able to do frontline selling, but that can come into the board and explain why we need to invest in certain areas along with your product team and the CEO, as an example. So what I found is that works best in those areas are almost aspiring entrepreneurs that are really good salespeople as well. And they work really well with the entrepreneurs within the company to help bring that vision to light. And they work incredibly well cross-functionally. It's a really unique blend at that first hire. But it's a really cool person when you find them.
Yeah, the kind of a little bit of jack of all trades that can kind of bring that versatility to the role. I think is probably pretty useful.
And sorry, exactly. One last thing on that hire, I would almost err in that hire toward the analytical type versus your versus a traditional sales type. You still need someone that can understand how to do a sale and how to go through the process, but you need somebody that can also sit down with you and go through spreadsheets about market opportunities and cost, and do we want to go into this account? Well, that can work really closely with the C-suite. Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good. We have a kind of another question come in here, and I might riff off of it a little bit here, but coming from Mia, saying they're a SaaS-based company, they're subscription-based organization with already a pretty robust customer base, about 10,000 plus customers, but 0 of them are enterprise. They kind of want to transition into that enterprise space. So if you already do have kind of a robust product that does have a little bit of clout to it, how do you kind of leverage that into going into these enterprise or governmental spaces, one, and two, maybe you could speak to the difference between, and this kind of transfers into a little bit later, but the difference between a B2C or a B2B2C and a B2B company. I think that would be very useful in terms of the sales cycle is a bit different for that, even though you're both dealing with enterprise customers. What the C at the very end definitely changes a lot of the equation.
Yeah. Okay. Good questions. Let's start with the 10,000 customer organization in EMEA. First of all, congratulations. That's, I mean, you can do a lot without foundation. It's beyond a foundation. My question, and I don't know if they have an opportunity to answer there in chat or otherwise, have you gotten to that 10,000 through like product-led growth, like free trials and that kind of thing? Or like what, if you could give a couple words that define the marketing strategy there? While they answer that, what I might say is your sales methodology will change as you go up market, but you don't have to obviously completely overhaul it. So I would recommend chunking it out, right? So you don't, and again, I don't know exactly how they define SMB in their model, but I do recommend just climbing the ladder is what we all do. So if SMB is defined as, I'm going to make it up 200 employees and below, then let's take a look at what it looks like to go from 200 to 1,000. And that will probably take a pretty obvious change in marketing strategy. Again, it might not be a wholesale change, but you might, in many cases, like companies start realizing as they go up market, and that might be too finite of an example to I think highlight the point. But the further that you go up market, a lot of times you do have to change from like a product-led growth to a combination of product-led growth, seed and feed, to then a little bit or a lot more targeted in cases. And that pendulum swings the further up market you go, right? So we at Freshworks, we're a product-led growth company. We do a lot of seed and feed that really helps us grow into the enterprise. I always say we were going into the enterprise whether we wanted to or not. They were pulling us up there. They loved it. It was working well for a lot of departments and companies at scale that were kind of pulling us in, candidly, even before we had formalized enterprise teams years ago. And then our job was to kind of formalize around that. But what we saw in that was a lot of deals that we could cultivate into much larger enterprise deals. And those didn't do that on their own with product-led growth. We had to take those pocket deals, aggregate them, and get people that had the expertise and the profile to go talk to the CIOs, in our case, that could aggregate that buying power and think bigger and think strategically and have those strategic conversations. So it changes your marketing model, and it starts to change like your BDR marketing model and ratios. The very last thing that I'll say on this is the biggest thing that has to change and it depends on the organization, but the further up market you go is if you have onboarding and if you have customer success. So to me, the key of, let's call it, once you start going 1,000 employees and above, or it just depends on the company and the product. Your customer success has to be as well much more targeted, much more relationship driven, much more strategic. You can't do it at scale in a lot of the ways that you used to do it. You can still leverage technology. You should still be very smart and very, very digital about it. That's one of the things I'd argue we offer companies from Freshworks. But you also have to have those long-term relationships that enterprise CIO or even director of technology or whatever your persona is knows that they can reach out to at any given time to build that relationship. And that a lot of times, many times, is very different than doing like SMB at scale.
They added some clarifications
Yes.
toward that they're not a SaaS model, but they are a B2B subscription based, and they use a lot of affiliate marketing to get to with their partners, and a lot of similar target audience from there, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd love to learn more about that. Yeah, it sounds, I mean, there you would think there would be a way to leverage what you have to kind of as like a foothold in the, in the mountain to kind of go up a level, then go up a level. And I'm sure there is. I'm sure you all thought about it. Yeah, I would just consider chunking it off in bite sizes and moving up in that way versus going full bore up to a 15,000 person company. I see. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. You also asked about B2B, B2C.
Yeah, so we kind of have another question that speaks to that little aspect of it, but there's B2B market, there's the B2B market, and there's B2B2C market. This person that has a question in chat says they're going from B2C to a hybrid of B2C to B2B2C. So it looks like they have a product that can also be leveraged through some partners or things like that. Maybe it's a healthcare device or some kind of insurance device. I don't know. But like, what do you look in terms of ramping up your B2B2C aspects of your business, if you weren't, maybe it goes along with the lines of the previous kind of talk, but how do you go about like transferring or making that transition into the B2B2C world? Like, and what's the argument there, or how does the argument change whenever you go into those rooms?
Okay. Yeah, there's a couple ways, a couple things that come to mind when you mention the transition from, we'll call it B2C to B2C to B2B or straight B2B. One is agreement, like vehement agreement across the entire organization, all the way through to the board level on monetization models. Because the biggest thing that I see fail when people go from B2C to B2B is that their monetization models conflict. And so then you get into this thing, and again, I don't know this specific person's exact business, but hopefully there's something they can draw on from this, which is, a lot of times you'll get like we'll call it the prosumer or the B2C, but the classic example, we all know this one, is eyeball revenue versus subscription revenue, right? And that's one that's like, people are still learning their lesson in that one. We've seen that movie for 20 years now. And if the company at the board level doesn't agree, okay, we're going to gate certain features in our consumer product to make it more valuable to the enterprise, and if everyone's not aligned on that, then you end up with a lot of conflict in the business models and with the product teams, and sometimes with the board levels. Everyone has to agree on the monetization model and the long-term business model and the value of going B2B. That's the first thing I would say. And then, yeah, it's just, I think it's a wholly different sales motion for sure. We talked about the type of individual that I think we're individuals that are good for that. B2C many times, not all times, but can be acquired through less touch. Again, not always, but generally as you move B2B, it's a longer sales cycle. It's more complex. Even if it's not terribly complex, it's probably more complex. It requires more human interaction and somebody that can have an understanding of, or a team of people that can have an understanding of those steps to go through. And then in a traditional SaaS model, and I don't mean to assume that everybody is a SaaS model, but just with my background, what I lean on is, yeah, it does make sense if you're going to start. You need to evaluate your marketing model. So if it's product-led growth, great. If you have enough meat on the bone to start there to grow into the enterprise, great. Like a great example, I'll use Uvu, the video chat company, as an example. It was all consumer, prosumer chat. There was no B2B business model. What we went in and we found is that if you looked at the email addresses, we had email addresses from all kinds of Fortune 1000 companies, huge companies, small companies. We had meat on the bone to start right there. Yeah. And we could take a team of 5 salespeople and maybe a BDR or 2 and start to prove out our B2B model. And that is how we did it. So if you can find starting points from that to leverage to move up, that's always a good place. But otherwise, if they're totally different models and you're not able to leverage your all your customer records and from the B2C model, I don't want to say you're starting all over, because you might have a lot of the same product market fit attributes, but you'll probably have to start a different acquisition model.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe there is an opportunity to keep leveraging that consumer base and the data and the kind of the data and the value that they provide. But there's also the alternative if it's not fitting into your monetization strategy. I guess it would. I think starting there is probably the best point. And then if it's not aligning there, then maybe align it first and then look to engage in the sales activities. Right. I had a question come through the Q&A that's kind of speaks near and dear to my heart. I worked at Plug and Play, which is an accelerator. So I saw hundreds of startups come through, work with a lot of corporate clients, basically trying to generate that B2B kind of experience there. And within that, I saw the forever POC, basically enterprise companies coming to these startups, loving the technology or loving the service, and they really want to try it out. but they can't make that commit. They can't make that commitment. They can make a commitment, but they can't make that commitment.
Yeah.
How, maybe speak to closing a POC. First off, I don't want to knock it. That's a great accomplishment for any startup going and getting a POC. That's a great accomplishment. But getting out of POCs into the enterprise sale is something I also wanted to cover, because I think that's something that there's not a lot of education out there for that. So if you could speak to those two things, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's cool. So like I said, POCs are great. I mean,
and to clarify for the audience that doesn't know, POC stands for proof of concept. It's something. It's typically speaking a smaller contractual agreement, usually for a very diminished sum, just to again see if the thing works in practice in tandem with that enterprise.
Right. So Yep. Thanks for the clarification. That's exactly right. So depending on your stage, I've seen it work well in a couple ways, and I've seen it go sideways a couple ways. Obviously, the best POCs for a growth stage company are always paid like with good value toward you. You don't want to lose money on it. I have seen some POCs for like seed stage, and that's kind of okay because they're testing out product market fit and they have a dancing partner to work through that with them, and that's kind of good free feedback as long as it's not going to again sink the company. So a lot of that depends on the stage. But I think the more mature that you get as a company, for lack of a better way to say it, it still to this day, there's always companies, candidly, even at Freshworks, that are requesting POCs. Now we have a free trial, so we can push them there, but instead of starting with a X user group, they'll want to start with another user group. Yeah. And you have to, as a company, kind of evaluate your cost of acquisition. What exactly is the opportunity that they're scoping out that you believe could really happen? I'm hesitant to use this term, but I think it takes a lot of courage, right? You really do have to be ready to walk away from a lot of deals that otherwise would want to wrangle your sales team. Because look, more often than not, a lot of these POCs go nowhere, right? Unless you know that you've really got and I'd actually be curious, Zachary, like your experience with it, but unless you've got a really legitimate, scoped out, I'm going to call it X amount of users opportunity, that's a good return for the company, that makes good business sense. And by the way, to do the POC, they're willing to put some skin in the game. Yeah. But if they're not willing to put skin in the game, and it's like, hey, we're going to start out with 3 users and then we'll see from there, I just wouldn't touch it. It's not worth it. Unless, again, you're like seed stage and you're testing that product market fit kind of thing, or pre-seed. I don't know, Zachary, what was your experience with it? It looks like you had some previous experience with it there.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've worked in a couple of different markets. I've been in the kind of the Silicon Valley startup market, and then I also worked in the Tokyo kind of startup market. The Japanese enterprise startup relationship is a bit more methodical, which means the sales cycle was much longer. Yeah. But I think the processes were very much the same. I just think the Japanese side was a bit more granular in terms of like due diligence and making sure that all the T's and I's are crossed and dotted, and just making sure that those things are kind of in order. What I would say, and kind of the advice that I gave to international companies coming into the Japanese market was, understand that time is also an asset for you. Like time is something that you really need to make sure that you're valuing. Because these sales cycles can get obscenely long, and sometimes you're right, they might end in nothing. Very often the case, if there's not time also kills deals. So a POC is basically just extending the duration of your initial enterprise contract. It's basically adding on kind of an auxiliary portion of it, right? And so I was just kind of letting those startups understand your worth, understand your value, understand your company's value. If you think that, again, at the end of the day, if you feel like turning around, like you can prove to this company that you can save them XYZ, or you can bring in this amount of value XYZ, and you foresee that turning into a pretty sizable check, then feel free to pursue it. Otherwise, unless you have unless the stage of your company is much later, or you have more runway to if you just have more time to burn, then you can kind of reevaluate that situation. But I think that's kind of what I saw and kind of my experience with running these startups and enterprise customers kind of negotiation tables is what I've noticed.
Exactly.
But just to kind of circle back to that POC conversation, we did have a good amount of the startups that are watching this today are in that bootstrap pre-seed area. So, and even still, even if you're in the seed, you might not even have your first enterprise customer to your Series A, right? So, how do you get that POC? What's the channel there? Is it vertical specific, or do you have a tried and true? What's the Brogan method of getting in front of a decision maker here?
Yeah, I hate friends, family, anyone that will listen, potential investors, board members, certainly outbound targeting, but trying to find connections to those people that you're outbound targeting. And always my positioning in those are like, hey, we value your opinion as an expert. We're not asking you to buy anything right now. We just appreciate your position in your company and where you're at. And we love it if you take a look and let us know what you think. And if you see value from there, we'll continue it. And then maybe you have them on a product advisory council or something to help them feel included. And especially, again, if you think that their mindset helps your greater good of your community that you're building for, versus their mindset just helping the company that they're at. But I always try to seek out the thought leaders in a company, like those people that the more innovative type, Renaissance type people in a company that were really interested in the new thing and contributing opinions to that. And I felt like if I found the right persona in a company, then the conversations were pretty cool from there. Like some of the best relationships that I built were those relationships where they became really good friends and confidants and that kind of thing. But yeah, you're just scrapping. I mean, it's who's connected to who, where can I get that first appointment? You can do full on outbound prospecting, and that can work too. But anytime there's a family or friend connection, I hate to say it, but you do lean on it, or One Valley connection. That's where that's where your ecosystem. That has to be a huge benefit as well, right?
Yeah, makes sense. And I'd say lean on whatever connections you have first. There is no kind of silver bullet when it comes to the sales process. I feel like there's always that cold calling. I don't think will ever disappear fully ever. So sure, 6 degrees of separation. Everybody knows somebody somehow, but I would say that kind of lean on your personal connections first. And I do like what you mentioned there, kind of finding a dance partner. I think is something that you used earlier. Finding a dance partner, like that first sale, it doesn't even need to be a sale. It can kind of generate a use case study for yourself. Is my product actually viable for an enterprise? And if you have a enterprise customer that is patient with you, or kind of and is willing to work with you on creating the best product, creating the best service, so they can use it, then that's kind of the win-win scenario that you're looking for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I agree. I'd also remember in that phase, as you probably will, to not be shy about talking about pricing models that work for them. Every industry has slightly different tweaks on their pricing models. There's a lot of consumption-based pricing, of course, and there's per user, there's whatever it is, delivery, and sometimes your pricing model, as a function of your go-to-market, can be a huge differentiator. And sometimes people forget about that when they're talking feature functionality in the early stages. And don't forget about that stuff while you've got a dance partner.
Oh, yeah,
that you can talk candidly about what's the best way for you to buy this that makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, That's a good point. And I think to kind of continue on that theme, we have a couple more questions, but I'd love to continue on that theme. Bringing up price anywhere is always awkward.
Yeah.
How do you bring it up with an enterprise customer? Like like where does sticker shock sit in the enterprise sales cycle for people's first sale, or even going in, or maybe you have a new product that you're trying to try out. Maybe you have a couple of existing clients, but you have this really new service that you think would benefit them, but price-wise, they might not be ready to commit that kind of budget or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking for a lot of the stages of the folks on this phone, you again, not everybody, but a lot of people might be starting in Soho, SMB, and moving up. That's a lot of. There are certainly many companies that start enterprise and go the other way, but then it seems like the vast majority kind of start SMB and then move up, which is a great way to do it because you have a lot of there's a lot of ways to learn that way as you grow the business, and you can get it, and you can get some mass market there, momentum. But that said, a lot of times when you're SMB, I've always liked transparent pricing, like meaning published on the website for SMBs, because you got to make it easy for them to do their research and compare and do all that thing. And that's where you go into the pricing analysis, which is a whole different conversation, a very strategic conversation. But yes, obviously, as you go up market, the pricing conversation, there's just a lot more variables. Term length, the blend of products that they're adding, of course, the volume of users, what contractual terms might be at play. And so, yeah, I mean, generally I try to be pretty frank and blunt. Like with one thing I love about Freshworks pricing is it's really straightforward. It's very right size. It's you get a lot for your money. It's very value driven. So I've loved here that it's very easy to be like, and here's our price. And we feel good about it. And I'd say we don't shy away from it. It's a real easy thing to position, I would say, after your initial demonstration. Usually we do a follow-up call. So, we'll have our discovery call, then we'll have our prep call internally. Then a lot of times we'll do a demonstration. And then usually we'll either do, if it's a long demonstration, a lot of times we'll go through the pricing in there, or sometimes we'll follow up with the business champion to do pricing and go through the details of it afterwards. If I could just note, and I'm sorry to digress here, but this was just something I wanted to bring up.
Yeah.
When I talked about having courage earlier on the business models and the pricing and following the vision, I've seen these things converge, and I want to tell this story in case anybody's at this point, which is, and I won't mention the company name, but I saw a couple really bold moves by some of my leaders that I've learned lifelong lessons from at previous companies. One was a company that was in a predominantly e-commerce commitment driven pricing model. So what that meant was you'd go to a big company and you'd say, hey, commit to X amount on the e-commerce platform, and then we're going to deliver our services and our users for free. And we had new leadership came in, to which I served as the sales leader underneath. And they said, you know what, we don't care about your e-commerce commitment. We're going to do this by the value of the users on their platform and their engagement in the platform. We were the first company in the industry to do that. And to be honest with you, it was scary as hell. And we lost a lot of deals doing that at first. And we had to beat our head against the wall for an extended period of time. But our data showed us, and we knew that the market was ready for a change, and we had to find those initial early adopters. That ultimately changed the way that entire market went for the next 5 to 7 years, and still is today. But it was a really, again, we had to walk away from deals that we thought we were positioned to win. But it was a pretty courageous thing that somebody that somebody had the vision to do, and the whole team got behind them, and we knew that the market really wanted. But it took a while. It wasn't overnight. That's it's just something to think about in the following of the vision, if it's backed by the data to the extent that you can find. But big pricing model changes can make a big difference.
That's an excellent point. I think price is definitely price is one of the things that you're offering these companies at the end of the day as well. It's not just that. Or if you're over market, compared to your competitors. You have to be able to justify that value,
Right.
and you have to be able to speak to that.
Right.
Have another question here, what's the strategy to generate leads in the SaaS B2B market, especially with like markets that are kind of already heavily saturated with big hitters? So like markets that there's a lot of industry leaders that are very well established there. You might have a SaaS B2B product that is competitive in terms of price, in terms of value, prop, all of that stuff. It's just there's bigger names in the ocean there. So how do you position yourself in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, and I guess ultimately, how do we get those appointments and go after those deals? I think it boils down to knowing your differentiators. How are you clearly defined in the market? What's distinct about you and your company, or your company rather, and then finding the right ideal customer profile. Everyone always talks about it. It's really the thing, right? So I'll just give Freshworks as an example. As we're moving up market, I'm not going to go target Ford Motor Company like that. I might go target a pocket within it, and I realize it's being recorded. That's okay. We have pockets within like really big companies like that.
Yeah.
But if what a company wants is really hyper customized, 3 years of implementation services, and that's not who I'm going to go target. If they come to us and they have a project that meets those needs, that's great. I know our value proposition and our differentiators is we take what was previously a very complex enterprise only type of technology that's now 20 years old. This is what the market was doing. That would take 6 months to a year to customize. We had, these are my words, not our founders, but I think we had like a good mid mover advantage, if not late mover advantage, that we have a modern vision right out of the box that we can implement what would have taken these companies 6 months to a year in like 12 weeks. And it's going to accomplish the vast majority of what any company in a certain range would want to do. And as we've talked about, the virtues of building product for the greater SaaS community that you're growing with and to, as that keeps growing, as our product suite keeps growing, we keep just going further and further up market, whether we want to or not. We're getting pulled up there. But I know my value propositions right now are rapid time to value, quick implementations, low complexity, low overhead. And I'm going to go target those companies that I know are looking for that. And I'm going to lead on those messages. And then I know that there's other people that really are looking for a 2-year implementation that want to make a completely hyper customized, I've walked on the floors of Fortune 500 companies, right? And you all have seen it probably. They have 40 developers working on like one SaaS product implementation. And in my head, I'm going, how's that? That doesn't seem very effective. But it's, it's like they're building their own custom software within that. So I'm going to leave those out of my ICP. Yeah. So I'm just going back to kind of like, what do I do? The first thing I do is I find out what's differentiated about us in the market. And I just described what it is for us, which by the way, plays incredibly well for startups and growth stage companies, because you have everything you would ever want to grow into right out of the box for forever, basically. But I'm going to start with the companies that I know need that value prop and use that value prop and anchor on that, because I know we're the only company in the industry that does that very well. And then I'm going to ignore the rest. I'm going to keep my message really simple. So whatever that is to you, those distinct messages and where that meets with that ICP matchup, that's the way to get those appointments. And you get the right people in the right persona, they're going to bite every time.
Yeah, building that customer profile is and being like actually diligent about like creating it and thinking about it, I think is something that is an often overlooked step. They kind of assume they have customers, right? But they don't actually think about who the consumer is, right. Not just the customer base, but the individual consumer. Right. I would like to maybe take a step back. Oh, and just to offer advice in terms of what I've seen from my experience with working with large Fortune 100 companies, things like that, like the Fords of the world and things. And you spoke to it as well. Maybe you work with that company, but not the company. You work with the department within the company.
Right.
Find the department that would be best served by your product.
Right.
There are people that are working. These organizations have multiple. They're not just one big budget, one big full thing of cash pile where everybody grabs it. No, they all have their own individual budgets that they have to plan around, and learning about that, kind of learning about their own cycles, can also definitely benefit you whenever you're going into these boardrooms.
Totally. Just if I could, a quick story on that. By the way, I do drive a Ford F-150. So but yeah, so right now we're working with, it's one of the world's largest medical device manufacturers. And we see this is a repeatable process that we've identified, which are new product lines coming out. And a new product line within this world's largest medical device manufacturing company has a very specific charter that they need to move quick. They're operating almost as if their own company. They don't want to bother with a huge complex instance that their other people are administrating. And we see that a lot. Another thing that we see are a lot of like divestitures where people have the opportunity to move over, or M&A. We can find these pockets of people that start to splinter out into or out of these bigger companies. And that almost always leads to subsequent other deals within that company as well.
Yeah. And yeah, whenever you do get that one hook into the company, that is definitely a signal for you that there's an opportunity to continue to proliferate into the other branches, or even into the other regions. Don't think about just different departments, also think about different regionalities. And if your product can go into those markets as well, is something that I would speak, I think is probably beneficial. Now we've talked a lot about the sale, like the kind of the sale, the enterprise sale, and getting it. Let's talk about the bad news. Let's talk about getting bad news. Like kind of when you get your no's, like whenever you see those big checks evaporate into nothingness, or you had a POC and you felt everything was going right, and it just falls through. What's the postmortem on that? What's the process? What's the grieving process? What can we look out for there? And what do we do in terms of analyzing it and making sure that we kind of shore up our deficiencies?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing that comes to mind, especially with this audience, presumably with a lot of founders and CEOs, is any win or loss, especially in your initial steps into the enterprise, has to be a group hug. And if you're not attached to it together in a way that you feel that you're a total colleague and in arms with your VP of sales or your initial salesperson, then candidly, you're failing as a company at going about it. Where I've seen companies make mistakes is that where companies are planning on revenue hits from big deals. Number one, like don't get in that model. That's why I say, like, don't get to where, like, and I hate to say this, but if we don't get that deal, we're not going to get the next round. Or if we don't get that deal, then we can't make it to the next round. Don't get into that situation, and certainly don't put that pressure on the rest of the org. If you find yourself in that situation, you have to be attached, like arm in arm as a team. So, you know, I've seen situations where I've been in with my CEO, my chief product officer, my CIO, and we're in there together. We're up until 3 a.m. the night before for a week straight, and the night before in a hotel room, just making sure we knew as a team, we left it all on the table. And there was no one ever pointing fingers when we left that. You know, if we lost it, we knew why. We got the feedback. Was it product? It was a group reconciliation of what happened. It was never just pinned on sales. And I've seen people, that's not a cool way to, run a sales org or an org. It's that first step into the enterprise has to be that group hug. That'd be the biggest thing, and then just learn from it and try to avoid this. I understand sometimes there are those situations where you really think it's a good fit and you think that whale does fit, will benefit your roadmap for the greater SaaS community, and you really do want to win it, but those are kind of few and far between. So I would look at those big enterprise deals, the big whales, as gravy. And if you win them, great, but you got to be willing as a team to walk away from them too.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. There's always an opportunity to point fingers, kind of at the end of the day there. But if you're kind of build the phalanx together with your team and kind of be pressing forward together, then you feel like you crossed all your T's again. And so if you lose it, and maybe you can speak to that. How do you elicit constructive feedback at the end of a lost sale? Like how do you get that? What's the process for asking for that? Because you don't want to burn the bridge for sure, but you also don't want to be like, you don't want to like keep hitting the same. You don't want to bother them at the end of the sales cycle, right? So
yeah, that's tricky. Usually if you're an early stage company, or you're like visionary in your strategy and they know that, and you're attached to another visionary in the company, in the prospect company, they're usually pretty cool about sharing that. And you can usually get that follow-up meeting. And a lot of times you can get a good long debrief, especially if I'll bring in, our C-suite, depending on the stage of company that you're at. Sometimes it's just really hard to get. I mean, like sometimes if you're in I call them like the Heisman Trophy RFPs, where you're doing this RFP where they barely talk to you and they just want you to go through a process, and you'll have the cross-functional team come back and say what happened, and you have to say, I never really knew from the beginning. This was kind of a blind RFP. We debate even competing in those sometimes. And that's usually when you're later stage and as a company. There's sometimes you just might not ever know. But it goes back to, if you're earlier stage, building those relationships with the other kindred spirits in the prospective organization that understands where you're at and appreciates you for who you are as a company and where you're at in your growth, that wants to give that feedback back at.
Excellent. Yeah, and again, I don't want to like discourage any startups in the chat. Feel free to ask for feedback. I think that's very useful, and it should be a part of your strategy regardless. Is just to make sure that you're having that consumer kind of input on it. But yeah, it can kind of get awkward whenever it always does whenever you kind of get those negative feedback, or get a no at the end of the day. It can make a conversation pretty awkward. It's we're rounding out on time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time today. So if anybody else has any more questions, I would love to kind of facilitate one from chat if that's at all possible. If not, then I will say that we're Brogan, thank you so much for kind of the input today. I really appreciate your time. Diksha, thank you as well. For those in the community that don't know, again, just to remind you, we do offer up to about $10,000 worth of Freshworks credits through our Passport platform, and you can redeem them through our platform. So if you would like to learn more about that, feel free to message Diksha.
That's a lot, by the way. I didn't know we did that. Diksha,
yeah. I think you'd give it up to,
That's really cool.
there's like a disclaimer over there. But I think what makes it more exclusive is that like we offer them tailored onboarding experiences, then we offer them these mentor and VC networks. We have these resources of podcast, event, and marketplaces, so that all these founders are kind of equipped, with all these resources and exposure to the larger community.
Right. Sorry. And to speak to that, again, One Valley is very much the same, but also our partner network is very much the same. We are kind of in the community building process. So they will work with you. They'll help you during the process of kind of utilizing the tools and making sure you're getting the best value out of it.
Right.
I was just going to add that our CEO Girish is our founder, is a founding CEO at this scale as well. So you can see where a lot of the love for this community comes from. What a great community! Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Any more questions in chat before I hand it out? We have one second. Okay. That's a good point. How do you leverage? Well, I guess we'll wrap up with this. Maybe it'll speak to the point. Maybe it won't. But they mentioned, how do you manage to make a big partnership with a large company distribute your product. So how do you kind of leverage that B2B to C aspect of your business? But maybe beyond that, how do you leverage your first big name, your first big logo? How should you handle that relationship? And then how could you use it to maybe your advantage? I think it might be a place we could take it.
Okay, and I'll start with the back half, and I'm mindful of the clock. So, but coming back to maybe the partner side of if I understood that right, the first part of the equation. Real quick on those first enterprise customers, we always we build incredible team. That's why I talk about the customer success. Every successful company, every company that I've been at that successfully moved into the enterprise, as good as the sales teams were, so were the onboarding and the customer success teams. And we built customers for life. And those, I mean, I can rattle through 25 names that I've done, that I've toured through trade shows and road shows with, and they go to customer dinners with us in certain markets. And, we become great friends and colleagues, and they're joined with us on our journey as a growth company. Yeah. So I think, you build great friendships and partnerships through a great customer experience that's repeatable, and they become your biggest advocate. That sounds like hyperbole, but that's exactly just the formula that I've seen work a lot. Like, without that, I don't know what you do.
That's a fair point. Yeah, you really need to make sure that those first few are really nurtured. And would you recommend editing or changing your product offering, or giving them a heavily discounted, or should that be something that you worry about and you shouldn't quite do, because that could be a slippery slope, and you might get taken advantage of down the road? What's the process there?
Yeah, so never do most favored nations pricing. That's, my advice, right? You never want to get, so that's where someone says, we all have confidential contracts, but we want to know if anybody ever has a lower price than us. And let's say we're buying 1,000 users from you, which would be a big deal for a growth stage company, perhaps. We want to know if anybody else ever has lower pricing. We want that matched. Never let that clause be in your contract, right? That's your business with that person, and that's confidential between you and that company. And that's the kind of thing we just got to say, no. And yeah, that's the thing, you're going to have to play with because you don't know, you don't know what scale is until you really get into scale. What was scale 3 years ago, 5 years ago, might not be scale today. So you might have 5 years ago looked at 300 as a big deal, 300 units, whatever you want to call it. And now it's 3,000. So you can only know what you know at that time and try to learn from that. And sure, yeah, you're going to give some volume discounting. The number one thing though is, like, don't give it away. Make sure that they have skin in the game, because if they don't, they're not going to be sharing in the partnership and the success of it. If it's something that they can just kind of lay down and die because they run out of IT resources or resources to implement it, if it costs more to them or less to them to just lay down the resources to implement it, and they do that, then you're hosed, right? So you want to make sure that they're in it with you. Yeah.
Great note to end on. I think make sure the partners are partners at the end of the day, and make sure that they're working with you on these projects together, and not just relying on you or not if they don't put any value into it. Brogan, thank you so much for joining us. Disha, thank you as well.
Thank you all.
With that, I think that can kind of concludes our session. Thank you again so much for everybody being able to join us today. The recording of this session will be on the One Valley Passport platform in roughly a week. I'd say roughly a week. So look forward to that. We'll send out an email at the very end. But thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you later.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the questions.
Yeah.
Thanks, Zachary.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.